this lesson focuses on the IELTS listening question types called plan, map, and diagram completion questions. So this is an example of what you might see. We'll just take a look here to get familiar with it, and then later in the lesson we'll analyze it a little bit. But this would be an example of a plan. So a plan is basically the floor plan of a building, usually, and it shows the layout of the rooms and different things you would find inside a building. And as you see there, some information is labeled for you, and some information is missing. And the questions are the things you need to fill, the missing information that you need to fill in. Okay, now a map question will look very similar to this, except it will simply be a map of usually a city or a town's, like a downtown area of a city. Maps look like this also. They're not very detailed. You're not going to have an extremely detailed map on the IELTS listening paper. They look very simple, just like the one you see. A diagram will be also similar, but it will not be a map of any kind or a plan. It will be a diagram usually of some kind of object or some type of process or phenomenon. So we'll look at an example of a diagram later in this lesson as we do an example question. The other thing to note here just quickly, usually this type of question, plan, map, and diagram completions, will have the answer choices in a box for you. Okay, not always. These can be short answer questions sometimes, but most frequently you'll have a list of options to choose from to fill in the blanks on the plan, map, or diagram you're looking at. Okay, so that's just to become familiar. Let's take a look at how to approach these questions and some basic information about them. All right, so the thing you're going to be listening for in this type of question is often directional vocabulary. So things like north, south, east, west, to go through the door, right? There's going to be someone often giving a tour of some place, or for some reason describing the layout of a building. Okay, so you might be listening to a tour guide of some kind, or you may be lost, and this person is helping you to find various destinations. They're going to give you directional vocabulary, and that's what you use to sort of locate and identify the different parts of the map or the plan that you're looking at. If it's a diagram question, you might be hearing descriptions of an object or some type of phenomenon, and you need to label the various elements that you see on the diagram itself. Okay, so you use the directional vocabulary, descriptions of the places or the things you're looking at from the speakers, and descriptions of whatever object or phenomenon is taking place, and you try to use those to fill in the gaps that you see, the questions. Okay, now in the time you have before listening to the speakers for these types of questions, so your time to analyze and make predictions about the questions, here's some advice on how to handle this particular type of IELTS listening question. Okay, so first of all, make sure you take a close look at the given information on the visual that you're looking at. Okay, so they're going to give you some names of places. They're going to give you some clues about where things are that are going to relate directly to what the speakers talk about. And so it's important to have a good sense of where things are located on the particular visual that you're looking at for this type of question. So definitely step number one should be to take a scan over the visual to sort of get your sense of where things are located. Okay, so the specific things you should look at: the title, directional information, any labels that are already there for you on the visual, and also, of course, look at the answer choices that you have, because these things will all relate in some way to what the speakers say in the passage. Okay, so take a close look at all of that information. The next thing you want to do then, after you've sort of scanned the entire thing, trying to gather as much information as you can about where things are and what's going to be described by the speakers, The next thing you want to do is locate the first question. Okay, that is where you're going to hear the information to help you answer that first question first from the speakers. So that's the place to begin. Take a close look in the surrounding area surrounding that first question to give you clues about what you need to be listening for to get that first answer. Because most of the time, almost always, the speakers are going to describe something surrounding that first question to get you started. Okay? Then the next thing you want to do is notice the sort of sequence of questions on the visual. Okay? So moving from numbers 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, how do the questions progress? And you need to make guesses about what are going to be the signals that let me know to move on from one question and to listen for the answer to the next question. Okay, so let's think about that just a little bit on what I'm talking about here. Back to our example question, the plan completion question we saw at the beginning of this lesson. Okay, so as we're scanning this particular plan, notice a few things. So if we're just trying to scan it to get the basic information, well, we look at the title. The title up at the top is Office Floor Plan. Okay, so we're looking at an office space of some kind, all right? And that's what we're going to hear described by the speaker. All right, then, very important information, some directional information is provided to you. We have the north end all the way to the left and the south end all the way to the right. Okay, that is probably very important information. It is almost guaranteed that the speaker at some point is going to use north and south as descriptions of what he or she is talking about. Okay, so very important to circle that. Just make a note of it, which direction is which on this particular map. Okay, so north and south, very key information there. Then as we're looking around, okay, we've got some provided labels. We've got some numbers of numbered rooms at the top, 101, 102, 103, 104, and we're supposed to label the room next to room 101. We could maybe guess that it's going to be room 100, but IELTS would not give you such an easy question. It's going to be something other than room 100 there. But that answer choice 3 is in between, sort of wedged in between room 101 there and the restrooms that are all the way to the left. So we have to listen for that. But more importantly, as you're analyzing and predicting for this question, as we noted earlier, just a moment ago, it's important to begin with question number 1. Where is it located and what is surrounding it? Okay, well, question number 1 on this particular plan is, of course, right in the middle of this plan. Okay, so that could make it tough. We would have to listen for what are they going to use to get you started? Are they going to talk about how this particular thing is at the center of the entire complex, or is it next to the restrooms, or is it adjacent to the cafeteria? All right, we would have to listen closely for that, but we know that the information to answer question number 1 is going to come first in the description from the speakers. Okay, so that's key. Then if you look at my arrows there, we just notice, okay, we moved north, and I guess that's west to number 2. So maybe that's something that is going to be described by the speaker as when to move on to question 2. And then we go all the way across to the other side of the complex, across the restroom area, across whatever we have for in the middle of the complex for question 1 to get to question 3. So the questions are going to move in that order. And we should note, okay, what are some possibilities for the way they're going to describe that movement? All right, that's something to pay attention to as you're planning and analyzing questions before you listen to a passage. All right, now let's try to answer some questions here. I'm going to give you a chance to listen to a part of a passage that would help you to answer these two particular questions, okay? So we've got questions 1 and 2, and we've got our answer choices all the way over to the left. Now, I'm going to help analyze this with you just a little bit before you listen. Notice a couple of things. First of all, our labels. We've got the ocean floor there, so that ship that we see is way at the bottom of the ocean floor. Maybe that's important to our description. We have something called a transducer at the top left corner, and actually the item itself, the transducer, is that object you see with the arrow pointing to it. So perhaps we know what that is, perhaps we don't. Okay, if you know what that is, great. That's going to help you. But that's something we're going to hear described by the speakers. Okay, we can assume that. And then it looks like answer choice number 2, question 2, is going to be something connected to that transducer, maybe a part of the transducer. So that's important to notice, that we might need to listen for something that is somehow connected to or part of the transducer itself. And then what's going on with these arrows? Well, if you look at the answer choices over to the left, perhaps you could make a good guess. So these arrows are going to be something directionally heading towards the boat that we're seeing down at the bottom of the ocean floor. And then we're supposed to label the arrows going down. And then there are arrows going back up towards this thing, the transducer, okay? We don't need to label those, but apparently that's going to be something that's described by the speaker in some way as well. All right, so what is the down arrow coming out of the transducer, and what is this object that's attached to or part of the transducer? Those are the things we need to listen for from the speakers of this passage, okay? We've got some answer choices to the left: dormant, ping, echo, shipwreck, and receiver. All right, now just a quick note here. I noticed, now maybe you're not sure, maybe A is a new word for you, but the word dormant is different from these other words because dormant is an adjective. All the other words are nouns. Okay, that is an interesting thing to note if you would notice that before listening to this passage. Okay, so that's enough analyzing this. Why don't you give it a shot? This is, I'll just set this up for you. This is a portion of a classroom discussion where the professor and some students are discussing the topic of sonar. Okay, so we're going to pick it up in about the middle of this passage where the two items that we're supposed to label are described. Okay, I'm going to play the passage now.
Professor Milton, how can an object like a shipwreck that's been lying on the ocean floor for years produce an echo? It's completely dormant.
That's because the echo isn't of a noise sent out from the shipwreck. It's sent out from the ship. The sonar device. That's why we say this is an active sonar transducer. In active sonar, a signal of sound is transmitted through the water. You may have heard of the words pulse or ping to describe this signal. It's a short pitch, but it travels at the speed of sound. And because we know the precise speed of sound in water,
then we know by the time until the echo of the signal gets back to the transducer how far away the object is.
Exactly. And in which direction it can be found too. The sounds emitted from the transducer are sometimes audible, but often they're ultrasonic. That means the pings are so high-pitched they're beyond the capabilities of perception by the human ear. But the transducer is equipped with a special receiver for these kinds of signals.
Okay, so how did you do? Were you able to get those two questions? Well, the answers I hope you got are number 1, B. So the down arrow there is what is described as a ping by the speakers. And number 2 is the receiver. The receiver is what is described as the object on the transducer that receives the signal, the echo, that comes back from the ping that is directed down towards the ocean floor, and that's how sonar sort of works. It's sort of these the signals are sent out towards the bottom of the ocean floor in this case, and then the echo is returns to the transducer and is picked up by a special receiver that is capable of hearing that particular noise. Okay, so those are your answers there. Here's where they come in the passage. So some wrong answer choices there. So shipwreck obviously doesn't make sense for each of these. If you know what that is, you know that a shipwreck is a is a ship that sank to the bottom of the ocean. So that ship at the bottom could be labeled a shipwreck, but that wasn't one of our answers that we needed to provide. Dormant, okay, is our adjective there that we noted before listening, and that is used to describe the ship that is at the bottom. So the student wonders, how could a ship produce a signal? And the professor indicates, well, actually the ship doesn't produce a signal. It's an echo off of the ship there. Okay, so dormant doesn't work. What we get in the green there, the possible answers that are used to describe the signal being transmitted or sent out of the transducer are pulse or ping. Okay, and the professor even says you may have heard the words pulse or ping to describe this particular signal. Okay, so and that's where we get the answer choice for number 1, that signal that is being sent down. Some clues for you from what the professor says. After the professor describes this signal as a pulse or a ping, he continues on. He says it's a short pitch, but it travels at the speed of sound. Okay, short. The diagram shows you a bunch of short signals being sent out of the transducer. So that's a clue to you about what the professor was describing in that case, where these signals are sent out, these very short signals are sent out towards the ocean floor. Okay, then the female student responds, okay, then we know by the time until the echo of the signal gets back to the transducer how far away the object is. Okay, so these echoes are the things that are on your diagram there, showing that they return back to the transducer, and that's what the transducer picks up. Our answer for number 2 then comes all the way at the end of what the male professor responds with, okay? So he says all the way at the bottom of the sentence, but the transducer is equipped with a special receiver for these kinds of signals. Okay, to be equipped means that is something that is part of or belongs on the transducer. Okay, so that's what we saw in the diagram, this object that is sort of attached to the bottom of the transducer that the arrow is pointing to for question number 2. That's where we get the answer we need to supply there, which is receiver, one of the answer choices in the box. Okay, so that's how to approach these plan, map, and diagram completion questions on the IELTS listening paper. Remember, you're going to be mostly listening for directional vocabulary, descriptions of a place, or descriptions of an object to help you complete these questions. What you need to do is to just simply study the given information, okay? In the time before you're listening, you study all that's there, you look for the first question, and you analyze the sequence of questions to get clues about what order the information will come in the passage. So that's how to approach this type of question on the IELTS listening paper.